All right, I have the great privilege to introduce 3 volunteers here at the museum who also are veterans who served. And they brought with them today, and what you're going to hear and discuss, objects that they have a strong personal connection with. So we have Miguel, Marcy, and Bob here today. And back in March, we did a Vietnam Veterans, for Veterans Day, Vietnam War Veterans Day, something similar to the public. And it resonated so well with our visitors that we thought this would be a great way to showcase what they put out and what they experienced through personal objects. And we think about artifacts, we think about these things, and they have strong connections to the owners, but they also have strong connections to visitors because they're common. They can kind of associate and can see themselves a little bit in some of these stories that they talk about. And that's what's so powerful about what you're going to hear today. And what we did too is also the exhibit team created these pylons, right, to kind of resemble the pylons that we have in the museum. They're located in the back. They're sort of paper versions of those, but it gives you an idea of where they're from, where they served, and their story.
I didn't realize that they were going to leave my most senior rank as part of the title. I was much more innocent as a captain and less responsible, I think. And there's a picture of me. We were soldiers once and young. I was 25 years old when that picture was taken. You see I'm completely splattered with mud because just before Sergeant Major and I had been on a helicopter that landed on a very wet landing pad on the fire base, and when the helicopter pulled pitch and left, it splattered all of us, just as you see there, and it was such a humorous picture. I thought that we needed to save it. So that's me at age 25, about to take over a 105 direct support battery in the 101st Airborne Division. I'm a VMI graduate, and I wanted to be a soldier from a very young time. I went into the Ashaw Valley in the summer of 1969 as part of the 321st Artillery as a fire support officer. And was part of the Hamburger Hill operation, but had a very close call on Firebase Airborne, and so I was pulled out of the Ashaw Valley and sent back to my parent battalion, where I was assigned as an assistant S3. And meanwhile, the battles were still raging back in the Ashaw. I was at Camp Evans by that time. And I remember this incident, and this is the kind of the prelude to the water buffalo horns. The S3 and my daytime replacement came down the stairs of the top and said, oh, and I'd just been listening on the radio that the battery commander of A Battery, 2nd of the 319th Airborne Field Artillery, was horribly wounded and had to be evacuated. And after my experience earlier in the valley, I was thinking to myself, boy, I'm sure glad I'm not out there. So the assistant S3, the daytime fellow, and my boss, the S3, came down the steps of the TOC and said, Monty, we're going to have to send you out to the Ashaw to replace the battery commander who was just evacuated. And I will tell you, from that time, which was about midnight until I left at 6 o'clock the next morning, was probably the longest 6 hours of my life that I've ever spent. So off to the Ashaw Valley, I went to Fire Base Currahee, and this is a great, it kind of tells you a little bit where we were. We were at the bottom of the valley. You see the mountains around us. To the your right of this image is Dong Bia, Hamburger Hill. And this fire base was really set there to provide fire support for the Battle of Hamburger Hill. And also, the road that you see there is the old Route 548, which was the supply route that ran down the Ashaw Valley. And it was our job to interdict that so that the North Vietnamese Army could not send supplies down there. But I think what's interesting, and we all, believe me, when we were on the fire base, we all thought on that high ground, anybody standing up there with a rock could hit our position. There's another closer up picture, and my battery is it's hard to see here, but it's in toward the left or to the right of the image. There's a couple of 155 guns there, but I had the 6 guns of the 105 battery. So this leads me to the water buffalo horns, and believe me, if the water buffalo horns weren't such an unusual artifact, I doubt that I would ever be telling this story. Sufficiently unusual that my wife in 50 years has never allowed me to hang it the fireplace in our home. And my grandchildren scratched their head and said, well, how did you get them back, Grandpa? And to be honest with you, I'm not sure how I got them back. I guess they came back in my footlocker. But when I left command of the battery in October of '69, and why I treasure these buffalo horns so much, is that the soldiers in my battery got together, unbeknownst to me, and put this thing together. I cannot tell you, and I did not ask, where they got the water buffalo. But I still was very, very touched. And it's hard to read the inscription, but it says, from the officers and men, A Battery, 2nd Battalion, 319th Artillery, defenders of Currahee, protectors of the Ashaw Valley. That specifically refers to a battle that took place 6 days after I took command. Remember, I went from one battalion to a completely different battalion to take over this battery. I knew nothing. I didn't even know the name of my battalion command. Now, those of you who are World War II scholars have read many times about the replacement officers that were fed in to the theaters as officers were killed or wounded, never thinking that I would be one of those. But 6 days after I took command, our fire base was attacked, and we thought subsequently that it was a retaliation for the Battle of Hamburger Hill. And we were hit by a sapper battalion. I'm not sure we ever completely estimated the strength, but we literally fought through the night. And we were firing direct fire, just like that howitzer in the Civil War gallery. There was nothing sophisticated about it. We were firing right out into the wire. But it finally subsided with daylight. They fired a few mortar rounds as they pulled back. I and 5 of my soldiers, we got clipped a little bit by some mortar fragments. Nothing to speak of. But that was a very proud moment for all of us that we got through it. We policed up 54 bodies from the wire, which was a pretty substantial amount. And the soldiers in the battery were very proud of what they had done, and I was very proud. And the infantry who were around the perimeter took no serious casualties either. It was a very, very one-sided battle, and that's what the soldiers meant when they said defenders of Currahee. So we stayed there on the floor of the valley. That's where we learned about the landing on the moon, which seemed even further away than it really was. We eventually evacuated Fire Base Currahee in October and went to a new fire base overlooking the valley on the west side of the valley called Fire Base Rendezvous. And the engineers worked really hard setting that up for us, and they stripped all the vegetation away from this hill ridge. But there was some short-sightedness in that, because as soon as the monsoon rains came, we were just nothing but a sea of mud. And it became very difficult for us to be resupplied because the helicopters could not get in through the low ceiling, and the road out to Camp Evans was cut multiple times. So we finally had to evacuate, and that was I believe that was our last presence in the Ashall Valley by the end of October of 1969. I think we did cut off supplies coming down the valley for the time that we were there, but it's sort of a metaphor for, I think, the Vietnam War in many ways. We were successful in the moment, but perhaps not successful in the long run. I'm very proud of that service, of those 100 guys. The same 100 guys that I took command of in June were the same 100 guys that came out in October, and the fact that we all came out with ourselves intact was probably the greatest accomplishment of my almost 30 years of military service. So that's the story of these water buffalo horns, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you have, either now or after the presentation is over. And incidentally, I must tell you, I'm very appreciative of Ms. Cass, the museum director, and all the people on the Historical Society and the museum who put this Vietnam Symposium together. Because for many of us, this was the first time anybody ever asked us about our time in Vietnam. And other than family members, what did you do in the war, Daddy, kind of thing. And so this evoked a lot of memories for me, digging these water buffalo horns out and remembering how I got them on that occasion. Yes, sir.
Is this battalion, the 319th, is it still in the 101st?
Pardon?
Is it still in the 101st right now? Battalion?
No, the 319th Artillery is not part of the 2nd Airborne, and one of those post-war shot-filled flags. But at the time that I was in Vietnam, we had the 320th, the 321st, and the 319th were the 3 direct support battalions. And the battalion of the 11th was the General Support Battalion, the 155 Battalion. I want to say 2nd of the 11th. I think that's right. Yes, sir.
You had the ground attack. Did you employ beehive rounds?
We did. We fired really 2 kinds of rounds, what we call killer junior, using set mechanical time at a very short fuse, so that round detonated almost when it went out of the muzzle, and then the flechette.
You had problems with the base plate coming back at you?
No.
No, you didn't.
We didn't. Fortunately, we did not get much rain during the summer months. It certainly came in October, but so our positions were pretty solid, and so the gun positions did not have trouble.
I mean, from base plate from the ground.
Oh, no. Not that I remember, or if we did, it was a very sporty evening, and we may have found something else coming at us.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Just to, this is summer, fall 1969, so President Nixon has been elected at that point. There's discussion about the invitation. What was the feel of the war at that point for yourself and the soldiers in the battalion?
Well, there's a quote that somebody was kind enough to put on my little paper. I'll be honest with you. My focus was so narrow. My focus was on that battery, 6 guns, the 100 men, doing my job, And then, for those of you, the Vietnam War is forever remembered by the poor treatment of the veterans that came home, and many of you may have experienced that. I can't say that I did, but I was a regular officer. I was in the platoon in the Army. And I went back to Fort Sill to the advanced course and then on to Germany for a second tour in Germany. So I really didn't have to face a hostile public like many people did. But, and so I consider myself fortunate in a way, but also I'm almost thinking that, well, I didn't have the full Vietnam experience because nobody ever really yelled at me for having gone over there as they did for many others. So, thank you all very much. I appreciate your time.
Good afternoon. Before I begin my presentation, I would like to thank the National Museum of the United States Army for giving me this opportunity to talk to you today about my service in Vietnam, and especially with my being a dog handler over there. I was born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and in August of 1966, at the age of 19, I enlisted into the Army. I chose military police as my MOS because at the time I was interested in law enforcement. I did my basic training at Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri, which I completed in early November. Then it was on to military police training in Fort Gordon, Georgia. I graduated from MP school in early January of 1967. Upon graduation, we were all in formation outside the captain's office where the sergeant was calling out names and assigning everybody where their next duty station would be. My name was not called, nor were 19 other MPs. We were told to report to the captain's office and get our orders there. That didn't sound good. Our original orders were for France, which would have been nice, but due to a shortage of dog handlers in Vietnam, we were selected to attend the inaugural sentry dog orientation course, which would be held at Fort Gordon. It would last a week, where we learned the basics of what would be expected of us as a dog handler. That's a picture of the first graduating class at Fort Gordon. People often ask me if I volunteered to become a dog handler. The answer was no. At the time, I knew nothing about dogs in the service. I didn't even know that they used dogs. Now, after this 1 week of orientation, it was off to Okinawa to be paired with a dog that I would soon learn would be my partner for the next year. These dogs that would be assigned to us were already trained in the States and had served tours of duty in Vietnam, so they actually trained us. The picture you see now is when I first met Duke. He's a 6-year-old, black 10 and white 75-pound German Shepherd. He was small in stature, but because of his size, he more than made up with in his aggressiveness. Most handlers were able to gain the trust of their dog, and within about 2 or 3 days, get the dog out of the kennel and onto a leash to start training. Duke, on the other hand, took me about 2 weeks before I could get him out of the kennel. And on the first day of training, without his muzzle on, he turned and attacked me, biting my left hand, requiring a visit to the base hospital. I guess he wanted to let me know who the boss was at that time. A sentry dog is a German Shepherd trained to alert an attack with the emphasis on attack. They were one-man dogs, only trusting its handler. Even another handler could get near me when I had Duke by my side. A sentry dog was extremely loyal to its handler. This is a picture of us training him. This was obedience training in Vietnam. Sentry dog was extremely loyal to its handler, and these dogs all had a tremendous sense of smell. They also had an excellent sight and hearing, and were especially effective at night. The sentry dog's training entailed obedience, what you see here, agility, detection, and aggression. Obedience because the dog had to listen and carry out the handler's command. Detection, giving the dog the ability to alert to the handler what was out in front of him while on patrol. And aggression, to be released and attacked whenever somebody was trying to breach our perimeter, thus protecting the handler and the assets that the dog and handler were assigned to secure. Upon completion of my training, we boarded, which lasted about 6 weeks, we boarded a C-130 for Vietnam. I arrived at Tonson Air Base just outside of Saigon in March of 1967. Upon landing, Duke was given a physical and was diagnosed with heartworms. After a month of treatment at Tonson, Duke was given the go-ahead to return to duty, and were assigned to the 212th MP Company, Detachment F, at Long Binh, about 20 miles east of Saigon, where at the time I would patrol and protect the largest ammunition depot in the world. Duke and I, along with 40 other dog handlers and dogs, were responsible for 24 miles of perimeter of the ammo dump, patrolling only at night. Our shifts were generally around 7 hours, and each post was about 1 mile in length, with guard towers on either end manned by members of the 199th Infantry. That's him in work mode, patrol mode. It was lonely out there, just me and my four-legged partner, and scary at times, but I knew that Duke would remain by my side no matter what might happen. The road I walked was dirt and gravel. That's the kennels at Long Binh. That's one of the ammo pads at Long Binh. That's one of the roads that we walked at night. The road I walked was dirt and gravel, turning into mud 2 to 4 inches deep during the monsoon season, making it very difficult to walk our posts. We walked slowly, constantly observing the perimeter, with nothing but the dark jungle on the other side. That's one of our perimeters. I would keep a close eye on Duke, looking for any signs that he was detecting that something might be out there. I felt how he pulled on the leash, the pressure. Strong pulling alerted me that something was not right. Once he alerted, he would stop, pointing in the direction of where he alerted, with his ears standing straight up. The hair on his back would also stand straight up. I knew then that Duke had alerted that someone was outside the perimeter. It was now time to radio back to the base camp, where they would send out a response team to see what Duke was alerting on. Duke did what he was trained to do. I pulled him back. Hopefully, whatever was out there would not attempt to breach the post before the unit investigated and eliminated the danger. Most nights were uneventful, if that's possible in a combat zone. What I mean by that is I never engaged in any direct firefight with the enemy. Occasionally, small arms fire would be heard outside my perimeter, reminding me that yes, the enemy is out there and to remain vigilant. And then there were the deafening booms that shattered the nighttime silence from the 155 howitzers that were being fired from Benoit Air Base, and the whistling sound that they made as they flew overhead on their way to support troops in the Mekong Delta. The noise was unsettling, to say the least, and it was one of the sounds that Duke did not like. His tail would go between his legs, and he would lean up against me. I guess it was my turn to protect him. and almost nightly helicopter gunships would lay down machine gun fire outside my perimeter to eliminate any enemy activity. Occasionally Spooky, a C-47 aircraft, also known as Puff the Magic Dragon, would make an appearance and light up the nighttime sky and jungle with tracers from the electronic miniguns mounted on the side of the aircraft. During my time patrolling, Duke would alert maybe once every 2 weeks. He was a great sentry dog, and I knew that as long as he was by my side, nothing or no one would breach my perimeter. In mid-September, I would be transferred to Detachment B in Vung Tau in the Mekong Delta, also guarding an ammunition depot, only smaller in size. I remained there until my return to the States in February of 1968. I was to leave on February 1st, but the Tet Offensive in Vietnam an additional 2 weeks. I would like to add here that on 31 January 1968, the start of Tet, the Long Binh ammo dump, where I had just left 3 months prior, was attacked and overrun by the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army. One of the casualties of that night was Gordon Courier, a fellow dog handler and the first from the 212th MP Company to be killed in action. To this day, when I volunteer at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, I make it a point to touch his name on the granite wall, never forgetting the sacrifice he made on that night. Military working dogs played an important role in Vietnam. Many people weren't aware that dogs were used there. I didn't until I was recruited into the Sentry Dog program. Dogs served many purposes in Vietnam, from hunting down fleeing enemy units to detecting ambushes and providing security to military assets. The sentry dogs were utilized for security. Scout dogs were a walking point with the infantry units, and tracker dogs were used to locate the enemy and detect mines and booby traps. It is estimated that had it not been for these military working dogs, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in DC would have another 10 names etched onto the wall. And yet the Department of Defense viewed these heroic animals as equipment. They were not allowed to return to the States. One excuse was that they would bring back tropical diseases. An estimated 4,400 dogs served in Vietnam, with less than 200 returning back to the States. Some were casualties of the war, with an estimated 270 being killed in action. Those that remained at the end of the war were either turned over to the South Vietnamese Army to continue their work as military working dogs, or they were euthanized. I trusted Duke to protect me, to keep me safe during those lonely, sometimes fearful nights on patrol. That picture was taken the last time I saw Duke. We made a great team, and I will never forget him. I believe I am here today because of Duke. I credit him for getting me home, back to the States alive. And because of that, I want everybody to know how important these military working dogs are to the security of our country back then as well as today. That is why currently I'm involved with the Vietnam Dog Handler Association as a unit director and the Vietnam Military Police Sentry Dog alumni. These programs help preserve the legacy not only of Duke but all of the other dogs that served in Vietnam. I also volunteer here at the National Museum of the United States Army, as well as the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, the Wall in DC, where whenever possible, I share my experience working with the military working dogs with the visitors that I encounter. Today I brought with me Duke's military records, the certificate of completing the basic Sentry Dog Handlers course, and a photograph of those that attended the first Sentry Dog orientation course. And that's my presentation. yes, we all will take questions if there are any more.
While you are here with your dog, do you live with your dog 24 hours a day, or after your duty, did the dog go back to the kennels and you didn't see him till the next day? You didn't feed him or anything?
Well, I say we were with them 24/7, but what I mean by that is that in time you get up, we had kennels for the dogs. They did not stay in the barracks with us. We would get up first thing in the morning before we even went to chow to the mess hall, and we would clean the dog's kennel and feed them. Later on in the day, we would take them out and train with them, either obedience training, agility training, or aggressive training. And then in the evenings, we would be on patrol with them. It was just myself and the dog at night patrolling, because that's when the dogs were most effective at night. And they could also, because of the fact that they were very aggressive, we could not have any other people around us at the time. So we were, pretty much with them 24/7. Now, when I left the country, the dog was sent back. Duke was sent back to Okinawa to be reunited or be united with another dog handler. Generally, a dog, when they send him back to Okinawa, they put him in what's called an isolation kennel, which means the only contact that dog will have with a human is in the morning. Somebody will go in and clean his kennel and feed him. That's it. After about 30 days, the dog will be antsy and want to get out of the kennel. So he'll accept a new handler at that time. My dog Duke, before I got him, was there in Okinawa for over 7 months, and every time they sent him a dog handler in with him, they just would not work. The dog would tear up the handler, and I think the only reason they chose me was because of my height at the time. So, I mean, he pretty much was the boss. Yes, sir.
I might have misunderstood you, but is there records on the dogs themselves?
Yes, I do have records of him. I got records from the day that he was donated to the military in I think it was 1960 or 61, from a woman in California. Then the records are very similar to our DD 214 forms. It shows where he was trained, and then after that, the three duty stations in the States before he was sent over to Vietnam in late 1965. He was one of the first dogs to serve in Vietnam. He served as at a artillery base up in someplace in the Central Highlands, and then was sent back to Okinawa. And then I picked him up. I worked with him. I spent a year with him over in Vietnam, and he actually did 2 more tours of duty in Vietnam before he was put down in 1970. He was just no longer effective, they said.